Today I'm going to be talking, how many were here last year? So last year we were in the process of working on the state's climate impact assessment report, and I am happy, very, very, very happy to say that it is finally finished. We just submitted it 2 days ago, and it is now posted online. It's a huge file. We're still working on trying to get it compressed and broken down into chapters so it's a little bit easier to wield. So that's what I'm going to be talking about with you today. Now let's see if I can figure out these slides. So again, I'm from the Nebraska State Climate Office. We are located over in Hardin Hall, so the big, tall, like literal ivory tower on the corner of 33rd and Holdridge. I don't work alone. I have two other colleagues that I work with. Dr. Ruben Bathke, who manages the Nebraska Mesonet. That's our statewide system or network of weather stations around the state. And also Dr. Eric Hunt, and he's got a long title, but basically he's an extension climatologist. It says for agriculture and climate resilience, but he really works with everyone, and he loves to talk, and he loves to talk about weather and climate. So if you have questions, we're the people that you should ask. So what does the State Climate Office do? We provide climate data, information, and knowledge to assist decision making, and that's all kinds of decision making, whether it's wildlife management, city planning, agriculture, anything related to climate. And we do this so that we can serve Nebraskans and help individuals and communities and the state prepare for and respond to changes related to climate. And we do this through monitoring the weather and climate through our own statewide Mesonet, but also looking at different national products and data as well, through research, through collaboration with other groups locally to nationally, and by engaging stakeholders and doing outreach events such as this one. So this is our report. It still says 2020, I guess it was it was finished in 2024. It's called Understanding Assessing Climate Change. The 2014 report, so 10 years ago, was called Implications for Nebraska. Now we've changed the title to Preparing for Nebraska's Future. Climate change is really complex. It's a really big problem. It affects everything that we do. So it was not something that just Ruben, Eric, and I could tackle ourselves. So we had 21 lead authors for chapters, 17 additional authors. We've had a 13-member advisory group. We had a review team of university and federal subject matters. We spanned 4 college and university campuses. We represented 25 programs throughout the University of Nebraska system. I know there's some people here that were at least on the review team. If you were involved in the report, can you just raise your hand? So we've got some folks back there from the Elder Climate, I always get the name backwards, Climate Legacy Group that served as reviewers, and then Dr. Don Wilhite, who was on our, he got thrown on, I guess, against it, not quite against his will, but he was voluntold he was going to be on it by me, so. So why are we here? Why are we talking about climate change? I'm sure everyone here knows this, that the climate has been, the Earth's average global temperature has been rising, and it's been rising rapidly. In fact, it's risen in recent decades 10 times faster than coming out of the last ice age. So very rapid, I sound like Scooby-Doo, very rapid climate change. So while the Earth's climate has always been changing, what makes this different is the contribution of greenhouse gases to that and how fast the warming is happening. We know that this warming is related to greenhouse gas emissions, so anthropogenic, so from people, but this relationship with carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases is not something new. It's something that has gone back nearly 800,000 years that we've been able to document through ice core records. So this ice core record is from Antarctica, and it's this part of Antarctica right here. So we could document this through time, this relationship, and it holds. So I want to talk a little bit about climate change science. We know there's this relationship. We often hear that climate change is a hoax, climate scientists are making this up, this is new science, this is unproven science. And if we look at it, this science is almost 200 years old. So back in the around 1850, can't remember the exact date, is when scientists first discovered that carbon dioxide caused warming, and they're able to show that in a laboratory. So it's something that we've known a very long time. Then we had a little break after that for a couple of world wars in there, so climate science wasn't necessarily the priority. But in the 1940s through the 1980s, we really started monitoring greenhouse gas emissions. So at Mauna Loa, the observatory in Hawaii, the first climate models were developed. And those early climate models were surprisingly accurate. In fact, Exxon warned their upper level officials, so Exxon, the oil company, in the late 1970s that burning fossil fuels was going to lead to warming of the planet. And so that has been shown to be accurate, and it has been accurate for the last 50 years. Scientists have been able to model warming. In the late 1980s, I can't remember his name. James Hansen, thank you. I told someone here I was really bad at names, and I've actually seen him speak, testified before Congress about the impending crisis that was the climate crisis. And then in the 90s, we began to see international action through monitoring, through assessing climate change, through the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement. In 2019, they documented, no, it was not 2019, it was 2014, that there was a 97% consensus among scientists that climate change was happening and could be attributed to greenhouse gases. Now that number is up to 99.7. So it's virtually unanimous. And then the latest efforts that have been taking place in climate science is attribution science. And so that's how we can say things that hurricanes are becoming stronger because of climate change. Hurricanes are dumping more rainfall because of climate change. Things like that. The assessment from Nebraska is not a standalone document. So this one was released just yesterday. We had 2 previous efforts. Those were led by Dr. Don Wilhite in the back there in 2014 and 2015. But they also go along with national climate assessments. The first one, which took place in 1990, and then 2009, 2014, 17, 2023, they are required by Congress to happen about every 5 years. We'll see what happens with the next one. I think the committee for that has been canceled. And then we also have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, those assessments that happened. So the first of those was in 1990, and then 1995, and up to most recently 2023. And those have, probably close to 100 different countries that participate in that, assessing the latest science and how that impacts global warming. And through each of these, throughout the years, scientists have found increasing evidence for climate change. And some of the guys were talking about this in the back, from the retired climate folks were talking about when they took climatology, it was studying past climates through paleoclimate. By 1990, when I was a freshman at college, the thought on climate change is that we're not likely to see that warming, clearly in our instrumental records for maybe another decade. By 95, we could say the evidence suggests a discernible human influence. Now we can say it's unequivocal. They've actually said that the attribution to humans has moved from theory to established fact because there's so much evidence supporting that. Some of the things that have come out in recent years, computer models have been accurately predicting climate change for 50 years. 2024 was the hottest year on record. When our report came out in 2014, that was the hottest year on record. 2014 now is at number 11. So every year since then has set a new record. Let's see. And then let's see, more than 150 unprecedented climate disasters struck the world in 2024. So it's kind of bleak out there. We don't just see that in the Earth's atmosphere and the temperature and the carbon dioxide. We can see that in changes in precipitation. We can see that in melting sea ice and melting mountain glaciers. We can see that in global sea level rise, and we can see that in changes in the ocean in terms of the heat content, the amount of heat that they're absorbing, and in changes to the acidity of the ocean, and many, many other things. I think it's over 50 indicators that we're able to detect climate change in. So what's going on in Nebraska? So this is what I'm showing you now are some of the results from our report that just came out. And we see that warming in Nebraska is happening in all seasons, in all parts of the state. And like that global warming, the global temperatures, we've seen an acceleration in that warming in Nebraska. And in recent decades, that warming has accelerated to twice the amount as it was in previous decades. So twice the amount now compared to when I was your age sitting in classes. And let's see, the biggest are in the panhandle of the state and in winter. This slide here shows us the difference in the number of days above freezing. So in Lincoln, we have seen 14 more days above freezing. So that's 14 more days when my allergies are driving me crazy. 14 more days that I'm fighting the weed battle in my garden. And then it's also important for, not just for me, but it's important for pests as well. So mosquitoes, ticks, things like that. Along with that warming that we've seen and some declines in precipitation itself and more precipitation falling as rain versus snow, we've seen fewer days with 1 inch of snow on the ground. When I was growing up, when I was in college, we would have snow on the ground and it would last a long time and you could go sledding. We just don't see that in Lincoln anymore. In fact, we have 8 fewer days with snow on the ground in Lincoln on average per year. I think the high is 15 fewer days in Norfolk, so a lot less snow. So I have sleds sitting in my garage that they didn't get used at all last year. So usually we get one good sledding day at least a year in Lincoln. And associated with this is that the energy demand for heating, because of those warmer temperatures, has decreased by about 6%. Well, what about summer? Now this graph looks a little bit weird, you'd think. It's global warming, what's happening in summer? We see that those maximum days, those really hot days where temperatures are above 95 degrees, have actually decreased in the eastern part of the state. Anyone have any ideas on why that might be? No faculty or former faculty are allowed to answer. Or you can. Anyone? All right, I'll let you go, Ken.
Well, the polar vortex and the upper atmosphere
So we do have some changes in the upper atmosphere, the disruption of the jet stream, global warming temperatures cause that to slow down, and that affects some of our temperatures. But also, and this is in summer, so this is related to, at least the theories are that this is related to this sheer amount of biomass that we have in the state. The irrigated crops that we have are what are currently keeping our high temperatures from becoming really high. And in the western part of the state, we don't have as much vegetation as we have here in the eastern 2/3 of the state. That doesn't mean that global warming isn't having an effect in summer. So this graph here looks at the change in summer equivalent temperature. So this includes humidity in it. You've probably heard about the heat index in the summer, especially if you play sports. So what this graph is showing us is that if we look at the central part of the country right here, that we've had higher heat index days, which means more humidity in the atmosphere. So those days that make it dangerous, those days that make it uncomfortable. We have seen an increase in the number of days with a heat index of 80 degrees or more in Lincoln, of 11 days, of 17 days in Omaha. So 17 more days of that sticky weather where you might not be able to do your sports practice, or it would be unsafe for outdoor workers. Summer is also lasting longer. So this graph here is for Omaha. It shows the last day above 80 degrees in Lincoln and Omaha and North Platte. So that last day above 80 degrees is occurring about 12 days later in Omaha, about 8 days later in Lincoln, and 12 days later in North Platte. We also know that that's occurring earlier in the year as well. Was it 2 years ago that we had the 80-degree day on the last day of February? I think it was. So we're definitely seeing a shift in our seasons. And the energy demand for cooling has increased by 9%. So while we might be saving a little bit of money on heating costs, it's not nearly as much as what those changes in cooling are costing us. Well, what about precipitation? In Nebraska, it's been slightly wetter. So our biggest change that we see is in the spring. And if you're a farmer, that could create issues with getting your crops in the field. So biggest differences in the spring. That rain is falling more at once in these big rainfall, these big intense rainfall events, rather than being evenly distributed. So if you have more of these high intensity rainfall events, that water is more likely to run off rather than infiltrate through the ground and help replenish groundwater supplies. So that's one of the issues with that. And that higher rainfall intensity, those days have increased by 30% in North Platte. And then in the Sioux City, eastern Nebraska, it's 29%. So about the same. So when we see those like flash flood type of events. Drought, we see changes in that as well. And what we have on the left here, this is, if I can find my bright thing, this is the Dust Bowl era. It's shown in this indicator called the Standardized Precipitation Evaporation Index. That just takes temperature and rainfall amount into effect. We can see that recently, as in 2012, we also had a dust storm that closed down parts of the interstate. So when we look at droughts, so the dry part on the bottom, we can see that they're not lasting nearly as long as the Dust Bowl, but that their value, their intensity is much more intense. So we're seeing a lot more of this like flip-flopping weather, that we'll have a wet year and then a really dry year and then a wet year and then a really dry year. And so that's something that is really challenging for people who are trying to do planning for climate. So what's going to happen in the future? how we can tell what's going to happen in the future is through the use of climate models. And those are essentially mathematical equations, some really hard math, that represents the atmosphere in 3 dimensions. And then they go through time and they run on supercomputers that fill the size of this room. And the inputs to those are things like energy from the sun, the changing solar radiation. It includes the atmosphere and greenhouse gases. It includes changes that we've seen in the land surface, ocean currents, and then sea ice. It goes in the middle. It does all of these biogeochemical processes. So it does all these atmospheric processes, ocean processes that we have math, and we are able to simulate those really well. And then we get an output of things like, what's the global temperature going to be? How high is sea level going to rise? How is rainfall going to change? What's going to happen to drought? So that's how we use those, is through computer models. And for our last climate assessment, we just use the global climate models that have a resolution of about 60 to 120 miles. And it uses output from 23 different models. It's part of a project, an international project, where people represent things different ways, and then they compare them all together and see where they agree and where they don't disagree, or where they don't agree. This time, because we have a regional climate modeler in the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, he was able to take that data, that output from those 26 models, and downscale it using statistics to a resolution of about 4 miles. And when we look at that difference, we can see that because of how coarse this resolution is, it doesn't capture the same things when we're able to more accurately represent changes in topography and vegetation. So what do we have predicted for the future? If we continue on the path that we're on, so we are currently on the high emissions path. That's the hardest part of any climate model, is figuring out what people are going to do, what policies we're going to put in place. And so currently we are on the path of high emissions. We are burning that coal, we're cutting back restrictions. So if that continues in about 25 years or so, we can expect our statewide annual average temperature to be 5 to 6 degrees higher. So by the time you're almost, not quite my age, we would have temperatures in a climate that's similar to Norman, Oklahoma. If we continue on and don't do anything to change the path that we are on, we would be more like southern Texas by the end of the century. So that warming is expected to continue unless we take action. And my generation has not been great about getting us that action. So it really is up to you guys to help change the path that we're on. This is saying in a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming world, about 2 degrees warmer. We hit that last year. As a 23-year-old in North America, you would experience almost 2 times as many wildfires, more river floods, almost 2 times the crop failures, 6 times the amount of drought, and 15 times the amount of heat waves. It's a little depressing, huh? And I love this graph. This is from NASA. It's a visualization. You can put in your own birth date and your parents' birth date, grandma's birth date, and it tells you, like, what's the climate legacy of you. So this is me. I'm Gen X, and so the warming that I've experienced in my lifetime to the point we're at now, you can see as it changed red, it gets hotter. If we go, I'm guessing most of you are Gen Z. I don't see any kids like middle schoolers in here. So your climate legacy, or up to now, you've experienced really compressed warming. It's gotten warm really fast. And what the graph on what this shows us is if emissions continue on very high, this is the warming you can expect in your lifetime. If emissions are reduced, say even to intermediate levels, that warming reduces. So the choices we make today will impact the amount of warming that happens in your lifetime. climate change is a really complex policy issue. It's not the science. I mean, the science is complex, but we understand that. We can represent that through models. We've been doing that for 50 years. But figuring out what to do about climate change is complex. It takes interdisciplinary approaches. It takes scientists ranging from climate scientists to social scientists to political scientists to teachers and educators. It takes everyone. The coordination has to happen not just on the local level, but all the way up to the global level. That's why we have things like the Paris Accord and international treaties. It takes balancing the concerns. And right now, I think we're a little off kilter. So you're balancing, ideally, you want to balance the effects of the ecosystems and the environments with the economy. And I think right now we're more focused on the short-term economy than the longer-term health of the ecosystem and of the planet. And so ideally we want to balance those. And then also everything is interconnected. So a change, and we have some examples of this in the report, that a change in global sea ice can, as Ken alluded to earlier, can affect our weather here in Nebraska in the summer and in the winter. It can affect national security. At Offutt Air Force Base, they train in the Arctic because of disturbances that could happen as that sea ice melts and it opens up new pathways. Our National Guard trains there as well. If we have a hurricane, we know that Nebraska always helps. And so Nebraskans send everyone from first responders to restore power, to even college students were there with Hurricane Helene, distributing meals and food and water. So it affects that as well. Let's see. In the report, the last thing that we have in this report are some adaptation risks, options, and impacts. We didn't prescribe what anyone should do, but we have a whole multiple pages, and we have a searchable database of those on the State Climate Office website. And they range from, we have a summary of the impacts that can affect all 8 of our focus topics. So energy, agriculture, communities, human health, et cetera. And then for each of these topics, we looked at the impact of up to 20 different hazards, ranging from increased rainfall to warmer temperatures to more hail. And then we have 348 actions total that are divided down by something that a community could do, the state could do, an individual could do. I'm going to come back to this. One of the things that we do, that we are starting, we're hopefully going to get to it in the next 2 weeks. Eric and I from the State Climate Office, we are starting a new podcast called The Climate is Nuts. There's the QR code there. And we're naming that basically after the flying squirrels that can now be seen on East Campus. They are the southern flying squirrel that have migrated northward to climate change, and Eric and I have adopted them as our emotional support animal to deal with climate change. So we want you to scan this QR code, go online, submit your questions, and if we address your question on our podcast, we will give you either a little stuffed flying squirrel or an East Campus Flying Squirrels t-shirt. So if you don't get that now, ask me later, and I'll give you a chance to scan that. Does anyone have any questions? I'll take questions first, and then if there aren't questions, we'll move on to our activity.
So I'm very concerned about politics going on right now.
You and me both.
Yeah, how will what's going on with funding and so on affect what Nebraska does in your climate office?
The effects of, well, our office, we are fortunate that we have 3 faculty positions funded. We do not have an operating budget for the State Climate Office. So how we are able to do the things that we do is through getting federal grant money, or even state grant money, but state grant money usually comes from federal grant money. And right now, those have been cut. Currently, my couple of grants that I have not been cut, but I know other climate faculty who have had several grants cut. And without that grant money, there's not a whole lot we can do. We use that grant money to hire interns in our office. We use it to travel, to do talks and things like this. Pretty much everything we do relies on that external grant funding. Right now, there aren't any climate grants out there from the federal government right now. So from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, from the National Science Foundation, from the Department of Agriculture, EPA, things like that. So far the grant, as far as I know, the grant that the state got, their $306 million to create or to implement climate action activities for the state, primarily through agriculture. The last time I checked, that One Red Nebraska grant is still on. But I haven't talked with anyone at the state to verify what they've done with that. Sure.
I'm curious about the state climate assessment. Included in that, are there like any like suggestions for like like actions that Nebraska can take to kind of like, you know, like help plan for what's happening and then also to like mitigate? And if so, like what are some of those key suggestions?
We primarily focus, the $306 million is going towards mitigation activities. We got $150,000 for ours, so not a whole lot of money compared to that. The state got $306 million. Omaha got $3 million for their climate action plan. Lincoln got $1 million. We got $150,000. But we do have that, however many, I can't remember how many I put up there, all of the different climate actions. And those were developed in consultation with our scientists here at UNL and with a consulting company, actually the one that did the Omaha Climate Action Plan. And we reviewed climate action plans for every state, local plans, any type of climate plan around the country, and looked at things that might be applicable for Nebraska. And you can find those in the database. We hope, our next step is we hope to go out and talk to communities and engage with communities and see what they're interested in and to help prioritize some of these actions. So I can't even, honestly, I can't even remember any of them off the top of my head. But basically, like these are some of the ones from the Lincoln and Omaha climate action plans, and some of these are some of the same. These are strategies, and then underneath they have actions. So things like transition to low carbon energy for homes and buildings in the state, to decarbonize and increase transportation efficiency, to align economic goals with the realities of climate, to improve protections for people in infrastructure. And one example of this is last summer we had 2 interns working with the state climate office. They weren't from UNL, but they were from the community of Niobrara. They went to University of South Dakota and Northeast Community College, and they worked with us and their community to come up with ideas. And they wrote a community grant, and they were able to get weather radios for their community. They were also able to get money to do tree planting to increase the amount of green space in their state. So there's a couple of examples of things that you can do there. And that, like, green space is the maximizing natural climate solutions, reducing waste, so increasing recycling in things. There are some schools that have clothing recycling bins outside their schools so that students can bring that. Those are some examples of that. And then engaging residents to co-create a climate-smart future. I know with this state, the $306 million grant, most of their engagement was in Lincoln and Omaha, and I don't think that they engaged any youth in that. And so we're hoping to do that through the state climate office. I know we were hoping to do it this year, but because of the way funding worked out in the report, we didn't get to it. But now that's on our goal for next year. So I have 5 minutes. Okay, are there more questions or okay. We will skip this activity. I'll just mention it, and then as you have time throughout it. What I'm hoping is for you guys to write your ideas to tackle climate change in your schools and communities on those big sheets of paper in front of you as you have time to do that, breaks, whatever, and then we'll stick them on the wall and we can all walk around and look at them. So the question over here.
Pretty early on, the timeline of climate science change, you said that Exxon warned us, and so
They
were an
warned
oil
their
company?
executives in their company.
Okay. They were an oil company?
So ExxonMobil, the oil company, so they were doing the research on their own. So anyone that says that climate scientists like me are in it for the money, I will put my paycheck up against someone from ExxonMobil any day.
Okay.
But yes, they've known about it, and then once they found out about it, they went on for a decades-long like propaganda.
Oh, okay. I thought.
That's what they use. That's what they use the results for. So that's another reason why like privately funded research isn't necessarily for the good of society, like publicly funded research from the National Science Foundation and our federal agencies. Other questions? Well, with that, I will turn over the microphone. And again, these are just some guidelines for you if you have ideas to write things down. As far as we know, the only climate action plans in Nebraska are for Lincoln and Omaha. So I'm guessing not all of you are from Lincoln and Omaha. So write any ideas you have down and we can use those as starting points for discussion. I'm assuming they will be available. Don? Ken? Yes, they will be available. Thank you, everyone.